Welcome back to the virtual companion series for the African Methodist Episcopal Church, A History, written by Dr. Dennis C. Dickerson Sr. This video covers Chapter 4, A Denomination in the Diaspora, 1880 to 1916. My name is Dennis C. Dickerson Jr., a member of St. James AME Church in Memphis, Tennessee. Section 1, Building a Denominational Infrastructure, discusses how the ongoing growth of the AME Church throughout the transatlantic required its advocacy and support for issues germane to Black freedom. Church members became frontline participants in struggles to protect Black humanity in the American South, spoke as admirers of those Blacks fighting against Spanish colonialism in Cuba, and defended disenfranchised Blacks and colored peoples against white settler hegemony in South Africa. 25 bishops elected between 1884 and 1916 were of diverse backgrounds. Wesley Gaines and Abram Grant, for example, were both born slaves. William B. Derrick, Cornelius T. Schaeffer, and Josiah H. Armstrong were all veterans of the Civil War. Charles S. Smith and J. Albert Johnson were both Canadian. John Hurst was Haitian, and there were several bishops from the American South. Wilberforce University held a preferred position in denominational appropriations, yet the school was in debt for $100,000. Wilberforce and other AME schools needed an endowment of at least $500,000 to satisfy debts and for various improvements. Daniel Payne said that the denomination was too poor to support and establish more than one college at a time. Many AMEs agreed with Payne and wanted to focus just on Allen University, Paul Quinn College, and Morris Brown College. These schools had the same potential as Wilberforce. Also during this time, Payne Institute moved from Cokesbury, South Carolina to Columbia and seemed more prosperous. AMEs in Ohio discovered that political involvement could yield important benefits to church constituents. The Ohio Annual Conference decided to befriend Joseph Foraker, eventual governor of Ohio. Through Foraker, Ohio AMEs gained a political ally to lend a powerful hand to Wilberforce. State funds for Wilberforce allowed for the creation of Payne Theological Seminary. W.E.B. Du Bois arrived at Wilberforce to teach classics. He aspired Wilberforce to sit at the same level of schools such as Harvard, Berlin, and Leipzig. AMEs outsourced their printing needs until 1848, when the denomination established a book concern in Pittsburgh and then moved it to Philadelphia in 1852. Charles S. Smith spearheaded the Sunday school movement. He was appointed corresponding secretary in 1882 and subsequently established a Sunday school union, which started in Bloomington, Illinois, then moved to Nashville, Tennessee. The Sunday School Union notably printed Payne's History of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, Sunday school lessons, hymnals, and periodicals. In Section 2, A Theological and Africanist Awakening, AMEs expressed fealty to Methodist belief and doctrine, and believed that their denomination was a thoroughly Wesleyan religious body. AME social holiness tied personal renewal to the transformation of their surrounding social environment. An emerging Jim Crow regime and European scramble in Africa energized these perspectives. Not until 1890, when James C. Embry, manager of the AME Book Concern, published the Digest of Christian Theology, did anyone write a systematic theology for the denomination. Theophilus G. Stewart published works such as Divine Attributes and Genesis Reread that embraced the evangelical theology that the AME Church espoused as a Wesleyan religious body, along with other theological discussions. Stewart, Benjamin T. Tanner, Benjamin Arnett, and other AME thinkers espoused Ethiopian millennialism, which put blackness at the center of their biblical and theological views. In 1898, Henry McNeill Turner dared to declare that God is a Negro and that no hope existed for any race, quote, who do not believe that they look like God, end quote. Henry Ossawa Tanner, son of Benjamin Tanner, was a photographer and artist, known for such paintings as The Banjo Lesson and The Thankful Poor. His images of blacks reflected their humanity, unlike prevailing cultural stereotypes that portrayed them as racial caricatures. In Section 3, Diverse Strategies to Fight White Hegemony, the U.S. and South Africa, the principal loci of racially oppressive systems, became venues for denominational development. AME clergy and laity devised strategies to oppose, undermine, and circumvent oppressive policies aimed at black subjugation on both sides of the Atlantic. Booker T. Washington built Tuskegee Institute and founded the National Business League. Washington believed that, quote, every right of which we are now deprived can be secured through business development coupled with education and character. Washington addressed the 1904, 1908, and 1912 General Conferences. Reverend C. Ransom, a future bishop, rejected Washington's belief that African Americans should eschew politics. Instead, Ransom preferred that they agitate and protest for their rights. The ideological binary between Washington's accommodationism and Du Boisian agitation influenced what AMEs thought about the best method to achieve African American advancement. In 1909, the launch of the NAACP, derivative of the Niagara Movement, signaled a resurgence in black civil rights agitation. Some AMEs introduced socialism as a solution to capital-based hegemony. Ransom expressed sympathy to socialism, saying, quote, the rights of man are more sacred than the rights of property. Bishops at the 1912 General Conference, where Washington spoke, expressed a desire to establish better schools, better religion, better homes, and more landowners. They, on the other hand, also said blacks had a right to complain of their treatment and to protest. Whether through Washington's National Negro Business League or Du Bois's Niagara Movement, AMEs helped to energize both strategies while developing their denomination as an influential institutional force. The AME Church now had 3 annual conferences in South Africa. They needed to respond to coerced segregation like that of Jim Crow in the United States. Bishop Derrick presided in South Africa in 1906 and focused on education rather than political agitation. He assured whites his activities were benign. His focus on education did not mean inattention to African rights. Charlotte Monnier, a graduate of Wilberforce University and co-founder of Wilberforce Institute in Transvaal, was also affiliated with the Native and Colored Women's Association, belonged to the ANC, and became a founding member of the Bantu Women's National League. In Section 4, Maintaining an Atlantic Presence, during the European colonization of Africa, Bishop William F. Dickerson proposed, quote, to plant the banner of the African Methodist Episcopal Church upon the ramparts of the forts of the enemy, Europeans, on the shores and in the heart of Africa, end quote. Bishop Thomas M.D. Ward said, quote, Africa must be redeemed, end quote. The 1884 General Conference wanted to step up assistance for Haiti and Santo Domingo. Payne and others were hesitant to have a Pan-African consciousness because it was too expensive. Henry McNeill Turner extended AME gains in the United States, Africa, and the Caribbean. He recruited thousands of ex-slaves and their preachers. He advocated black immigration to Africa. He viewed Africa as a refuge for oppressed African Americans and a symbol of black pride in the future possibilities of all African peoples. M.M. Maconie, born in Transvaal, and other blacks established the Ethiopian Church and laid the foundation for an eventual union with the AME Church. Formerly in the Wesleyan Methodist Church, racial inequities stirred Maconie and others to leave the church, similar to the exodus of Richard Allen out of St. George. Turner embraced the prospect of welcoming them into the denomination. Levi J. Coppin was the first bishop to be assigned and live in Africa. To satisfy the needs of such a diverse body, translation of the AME discipline and liturgy had become an urgent necessity, and there was a need for interpreters. It was commonplace for annual conference sessions to include multilingual renditions of hymns and scriptures. There was no African bishop or general officer, and denominational power and governance, finance, and publishing remained in the United States. AME preachers in South Africa were finding it difficult to gain licenses to marry, claim sites to build churches, and to aid refugees. In response, Presiding Elder J.G. Zaba of the Orangia district urged them to mute their insurgent impulses and declare their loyalty to the South African government to seem less rebellious. Turner's Pan-African vision shifted to Cuba and Mexico. Despite his commitment to immigration to Africa, he never lived in the territories he claimed as AME jurisdictions. AME chaplains recruited blacks to fight in the Spanish-American War against the Spanish. AMEs evangelized in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, and wanted to become their protectors. Evangelism spread to Indian Territory, leading to the establishment of the Indian Mission Annual Conference in 1879. In the final section, Women in African Methodism, Benjamin T. Tanner appealed to bishops' wives to organize and lead the Women's Parent Mite Missionary Society. William B. Derrick and Bishop Turner in 1893 started the Women's Home and Foreign Missionary Society. Both societies started because general officers believed women should fund AME expansion outside the United States. The WPMMS funded educational projects. Missionary was just a misnomer. Charlotte Magne, for example, had a girls' education project in South Africa. The organization functioned autonomously by raising and dispersing their own funds. The WHFMS became a venue for women whose leadership depended less on clergy connections and for those who were seeking ministerial recognition. Turner was an ally of women leadership and ordination. He ordained Sarah Hughes an itinerant deacon in the North Carolina Annual Conference, but Bishop Campbell rescinded it. Turner was convinced that female ministers could challenge the Zion ascendancy in the Old North State. He promoted women's ordination to address, quote, too much useless male timber lying around in all our conferences, end quote. Paine's 1889 book, A Treatise on Domestic Education, said women need not become ministers because motherhood was their singular and highest calling. Thank you for watching. Now join Dr. Christina Dickerson-Cousin as she interviews another dynamic panel of AME scholars, lay, and clergy. Please submit your questions and comments via Facebook Live. Thank you again.